Most of the time, we're not fighting the world. There's pressure to speak up, to prove our worth, and to stay visible in rooms that don't really see us. It drains something quiet inside. You try to stay calm, to observe, to be intentional. But it's hard when the world rewards noise and reaction. If you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you gave too much or revealed too quickly, know this. That quiet part of you isn't weakness. It's your strength waiting to be shaped. This video is for those who feel things deeply but speak sparingly, for those who want clarity more than control and peace more than attention. We'll explore how to turn silence into presence, how to transform restraint into influence, and how to move through life with unshakable calm, not by hiding, but by knowing when not to chase. Rooted in Stoic principles, this journey isn't about becoming someone else. It's about returning to the version of you that doesn't need to prove, only to understand. If you've been craving a new way to show up, one that feels aligned, grounded, and real, then you're in the right place. Subscribe if this speaks to you, and feel free to share your story below. You're not invisible. You're just learning how to move differently. Let's begin. 1. Observe first, speak later. In a world that rewards quick opinions and louder voices, the ability to remain silent and observe is one of the most underrated forms of power. We've been conditioned to think that value comes from constant participation, that being heard means being respected. But the wisest people in any room aren't the ones trying to prove themselves. They're the ones who are paying attention while everyone else performs. When you choose to stay quiet, to watch how people behave instead of reacting to what they say, you begin to see things others don't. You catch the subtle glance when someone's story doesn't match their tone. You notice who shifts uncomfortably when praise is given elsewhere. You begin to see alliances, insecurities, intentions, all playing out beneath the surface. And it's in that awareness that true mental strength begins. Most people speak too soon. They enter rooms trying to impress, trying to be liked, or trying to prove they belong. But in doing so, they give up the one advantage they could have had: clarity. When you speak first, you reveal your position. You expose your rhythm, your needs, your ego. But when you observe, you collect information. You learn the unspoken hierarchy of the room. You see who others defer to, who interrupts, who laughs too hard at the wrong moments. These aren't just social cues, they're maps. And if you learn how to read them without being emotionally pulled, you quietly move 10 steps ahead. There's a kind of confidence that doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing enough to wait. You don't need to dominate a conversation to control its direction. Sometimes all it takes is one well-timed sentence. But you can't get there without observing first. In high-stakes meetings, intense family conversations, even in casual interactions, the person who says the least often sees the most. It's not about withholding your voice out of fear. It's about understanding that your silence isn't absence, it's presence. Concentrated. Think of the last time you entered a room and felt a strange pressure to talk, to fill the air with something, anything, just to avoid seeming passive. Now think of what you missed by doing that. You didn't notice who walked in late and who subtly frowned. You didn't see who leaned forward when a name was mentioned, or who checked their phone when someone else spoke. These details seem small, but they're powerful. People don't reveal themselves in grand speeches. They reveal themselves in what they try to hide. And those who rush to speak are often too distracted to see it. There's strength in restraint, not the kind that feels forced or fake, but the quiet kind that says, "I'm not here to compete for attention. I'm here to understand what's really happening." That shift in energy changes how people perceive you. You're no longer just another voice in the crowd. You become someone who listens without judgment, who doesn't react emotionally, and who speaks only when it adds value. Over time, people begin to notice. They lean in when you talk. They pause when you stay quiet. You haven't asked for respect. You've earned it through clarity, not volume. I once sat through a panel interview for a leadership role. Everyone else at the table jumped to answer the first question. Their voices filled the room, layered over each other. I didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. I listened. I watched. I studied the panel. Who smiled at what? Who leaned back? Who took notes? And when I finally spoke, I addressed each of them in a way that reflected their own unspoken interests. Later, one of them said, "You weren't the loudest, but you were the only one who actually saw us." That stayed with me. Not because it flattered my ego, but because it reminded me how rare and powerful real observation has become. In the end, people don't respect noise. They respect presence. And presence starts with stillness. So the next time you enter a room, resist the urge to prove. Don't chase recognition. Don't rush to explain. Instead, take a breath. Watch, listen, learn. Because when you choose to observe first, you'll always speak with more weight, more clarity, and more power than those who rushed ahead. And that is the beginning of becoming untouchable. 2. The more you react, the more you lose control. Every time you react without pause, you hand over your power. Not to fate, not to logic, but to someone else's agenda. In a world designed to provoke you, to pull you into outrage, conflict, and urgency, the one who learns to pause is the one who holds the steering wheel. Emotional control isn't about shutting down how you feel. It's about refusing to let someone else decide what you do next. And yet, we've been conditioned to think that reacting quickly shows strength, that responding fast proves we're not weak. But the truth is the opposite. The faster you react, the less time you give yourself to understand the full picture. And when you lose clarity, you lose leverage. You've likely been in situations where something someone said lit a fire inside you. An insult, a dismissal, an accusation dressed in polite words. Your heart raced, your voice rose, your thoughts scattered, and afterward you felt drained, maybe even foolish. Not because what they said didn't matter, but because your reaction gave them more than they deserved. Your attention, your energy, your control. The Stoics called this the internal war, the quiet battle between impulse and intention. And the ones who win it are the ones who know that not everything requires a reply. Sometimes, strength looks like stillness. There's a man I worked with years ago. Brilliant, disciplined, but always on edge. Every comment that hinted at criticism became a fight. Every delay triggered frustration. One day, during a tense meeting, a younger colleague interrupted him mid-sentence. His face tightened, his voice sharpened, and before the room could blink, he was defending himself against a threat that didn't even exist. Later, in private, I asked him what he heard in that moment. He said, "Disrespect." But that wasn't the truth. It was projection. And in reacting to what he imagined, he lost the trust he had built in silence. When you react, you don't respond to reality. You respond to your interpretation of it. And interpretations, especially under stress, are rarely accurate. That's why emotional self-control is not a luxury. It's a survival skill. It separates the man who speaks with precision from the one who babbles to be heard. It's what allows you to sit in discomfort without scrambling for relief. And most importantly, it gives you time to think, to watch, to choose your moment, instead of being dragged into someone else's. There's another angle to this. People often test you not with intention, but by habit. They push, they provoke, they vent, and they're used to others matching that energy. So when you don't, when you stay composed, it resets the rhythm. Suddenly, they're exposed. Because the drama they expected didn't arrive. And now they're alone in the noise they created. That moment, when you choose stillness over reaction, that's when you begin to lead. Not with dominance, not with words, but with presence. Because the person who doesn't flinch, who doesn't explain, who doesn't rush to defend, becomes unreadable and respected. I remember once receiving an email that was clearly meant to provoke. Every sentence was laced with sarcasm and hidden blame. My first instinct was to respond line by line, to correct, to clarify, to prove I wasn't at fault. But I waited. I read it again the next morning, and instead of defending, I asked a single question that reframed the entire conversation. The reply came back softer, more honest. What I thought was an attack turned out to be frustration, not aimed at me, but at a system we were both caught in. If I had reacted, I would have deepened the divide. By pausing, I created space for clarity. In the end, people remember how you made them feel. But more than that, they remember how you made them feel about themselves. When you react harshly, you invite more of what you dislike. But when you remain calm, even under pressure, you send a signal. I'm not here to match your chaos. I'm here to hold my ground. And that kind of energy doesn't just protect your peace, it shifts the entire room. So the next time something stings, don't rush. Don't reach for revenge or the perfect comeback. Let the moment breathe. Let your mind catch up to your emotions. And remember, the one who speaks last, after observing it all, often says the only thing that matters. 3. Staying calm is a form of strength. Not all strength makes noise. Some of it walks into a room slowly, holds still in a storm, and says nothing when it could have said everything. In a world that rewards reaction, remaining calm has become a radical act, not of passivity, but of control. Calm is not weakness. It's what remains after panic has burned out. It's what allows you to lead when others are unraveling. And in moments of pressure, your ability to stay calm is often the one thing that separates influence from chaos. People often mistake calmness for indifference, but they're not the same. Indifference is apathy. Calmness is discipline. When someone stays composed while others shout, it's not because they don't care. It's because they've trained themselves to feel without folding. That kind of self-mastery doesn't happen overnight. It's forged in silence, through the decision to pause when you want to explode, to stay still when every part of you wants to act. That's where true emotional resilience is built, and it's why calm people often hold more weight than those who dominate the conversation. You've seen this happen in meetings where voices rise, egos collide, and someone quietly watches, listens, waits. And when they speak, it's not loud, but it lands. Why? Because it comes from a place that wasn't shaken. People don't just hear calm, they feel it. It softens resistance, it calms tension, and it commands more attention than shouting ever could. In fact, in moments of uncertainty, people instinctively turn toward the person who seems least affected. That's the paradox of calmness. It doesn't look like control, but it is. I remember a conflict between two department heads. It started over email and spiraled into a war of meetings, accusations, and passive-aggressive remarks. Both parties came into the room tense, ready to win. But there was one person, the operations manager, who said almost nothing at first. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend. He listened, nodded, and took notes. And when the tension hit its peak, he calmly asked a question so neutral yet so pointed, it shifted the entire direction of the conversation. No one expected it, because everyone was too busy proving a point. But that moment of calm clarity cut through the fog like a blade. The conflict didn't disappear, but the room began to breathe again. What changed wasn't the facts. It was the energy. Staying calm isn't just about avoiding emotional outbursts. It's about choosing your moment. It's about preserving your energy and protecting your mind from becoming reactive to every little spike in pressure. The Stoics knew that control over one's emotions wasn't a philosophical luxury. It was a way to survive life with dignity. Because the world will provoke you. People will misjudge you, insult you, and challenge you. But if they can't shake your core, they can't own your mind. And when you don't flinch, when you don't take the bait, when you remain centered, you show them something they don't expect. Quiet power. This matters even more in relationships. When someone you care about lashes out, not because they're cruel, but because they're hurting, your calmness can become a mirror. You don't meet their fire with fire. You don't escalate. You breathe. You hold the space. And through that stillness, you give them a chance to come back to themselves. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat. It means standing firm without violence, emotionally or verbally. It's a different kind of strength, one most people never learn to trust. Years ago, I had a mentor who used to say, never let urgency decide your tone. He led entire teams through massive changes, intense deadlines, and public scrutiny. Yet he rarely raised his voice. He didn't rush decisions, and people respected him not because he was intimidating, but because he was anchored. That's what staying calm really gives you, the ability to anchor others, even when everything else is moving. So the next time you're pulled into tension, whether it's a disagreement, a crisis, or someone else's storm, ask yourself, what would staying calm protect right now? Your reputation, your clarity, your peace of mind? Then act like someone who knows the answer. Because the world doesn't need more noise, it needs more presence. And presence begins with calm. 4. Sometimes silence says everything. There are moments when silence speaks louder than the most carefully chosen words. Not the kind of silence that comes from fear or hesitation, but the kind that's deliberate, anchored, and full of presence. In a world where everyone's rushing to be heard, where conversations turn into contests and pauses feel uncomfortable, the ability to hold your silence is a rare form of control. It's the kind of control that doesn't need to interrupt, dominate, or explain, because it knows that in the right moment, saying nothing is saying everything. Silence, when intentional, isn't absence, it's precision. And those who know how to use it create a rhythm others can't keep up with. People often underestimate the tension created by a pause. But when you hold it, when you resist the urge to jump in, to clarify, to make things comfortable, something powerful happens. The other person fills it. They speak more, they reveal more. And if they're trying to manipulate or impress, the silence exposes it. They start to overreach, explain too much, reveal what they didn't intend to. You didn't corner them, you just gave space. And the truth spilled out on its own. That's the unseen weapon of silence. It's not used to attack, it's used to allow. And in that allowing, you gain insight that no question could have uncovered. Most people can't sit in silence because it forces them to meet themselves. They start wondering what the other person is thinking, if they're being judged, if they should talk more to avoid awkwardness. But the one who stays still, who lets the space breathe, creates a power dynamic that shifts without force. You're not chasing approval. You're not trying to convince. You're watching. You're letting things unfold. And because you're not afraid of the gap between sentences, you own the room without raising your voice. This isn't just about negotiation or business. It applies everywhere, especially in conflict. When someone criticizes you unfairly, silence becomes your filter. Instead of reacting and defending, you pause. You let the words settle. You study their intent. And in that stillness, you often realize the attack wasn't about you. It was about their own unresolved struggle. By saying nothing, you don't give their chaos a target. You stay intact. That kind of silence is not passive. It's strategic. It's the kind that Stoic philosophy holds in high regard. The ability to remain unmoved while the noise around you begs for your attention. I once watched a senior executive handle a public confrontation during a Q&A session. Someone in the audience challenged him aggressively, using loaded language and an accusing tone. The room shifted. Everyone expected a sharp response, but instead, the executive remained quiet for a few seconds. He didn't flinch, he didn't rush to answer. His silence wasn't nervous, it was grounded. And in that short moment, the tension turned back on the man who had spoken. His aggression no longer looked bold, it looked insecure. When the executive finally replied, he spoke one sentence. Calm, composed, clear. The exchange ended there, and people remembered it. Not because of what he said, but because of how little he needed to say. Silence also has a way of revealing your own truth. When you stop talking just to fill the gap, you start hearing what's actually going on inside you. You notice your impatience, your urge to be liked, your habit of performing. And in that awareness, you begin to shift. You start speaking less, but with more intention. You start realizing that not every moment requires a response. Some just require your presence. And presence in its purest form is silent. So next time you feel the need to explain yourself, to reply quickly, to prove you're in control, wait. Let silence settle. Let it stretch for a moment longer than feels comfortable. Because in that space, you'll see who people really are. And more importantly, you'll see who you are when you're not trying to be anyone else. That's not avoidance, that's power. The kind that doesn't need to speak to be heard. 5. Don't let anyone predict your next move. Predictability is a comfort to others, but a trap for you. The moment people can read your next move, they start shaping your story for you. They plan around you, speak before you, and manipulate without needing to force. And what's worse, you rarely notice it happening. That's because repetition creates patterns, and patterns make you visible. Not in a good way, but in a way that strips you of leverage. The more predictable you are, the easier you are to control. Not because you lack strength, but because you gave away your rhythm too early. In personal dynamics, at work, and in social situations, most people are running on autopilot. Same reactions, same responses, same roles they've unknowingly accepted. The people around them know exactly how to trigger a reaction, how to get a favor, how to push a boundary, and it works every time. Why? Because most people are afraid to disrupt their image. They'd rather be liked than be underestimated. They'd rather be safe than sovereign. But someone who's learning to move differently, someone training their mind to observe, detach, and shift their behavior without warning, that person becomes hard to manage, hard to read, and eventually hard to stop. Stillness, when used with precision, becomes unreadable. But that's not enough. Unpredictability, when done with integrity, becomes power. This isn't about being erratic or emotionally impulsive. It's about developing mental flexibility. It's about making your next step so deliberate and so unexpected that it forces others to reassess what they thought they knew about you. You're not acting out of rebellion or ego. You're simply no longer reacting in ways they've come to expect. And that shift, when quiet and grounded, rewrites the entire dynamic. A man I once worked with was known for always saying yes. Reliable, supportive, never a complaint. People liked him, but they also used him. It wasn't malicious, it was subtle. Deadlines would be pushed onto his plate, mistakes would be forwarded with "Can you take care of this?" And he did. Until one day, he stopped. Not loudly, not with drama. He just started saying, "I'll get back to you," and sometimes he didn't. At first, people were confused. Then they were forced to adjust. They asked instead of assuming. And just like that, his boundaries were no longer optional. They were respected. When you interrupt your own pattern, people pay attention. It breaks their script. It makes them question what they've taken for granted. And when done with calm intention, it doesn't make you look unstable. It makes you look aware. Aware of the ways you've been giving yourself away. In your availability, in your tone, in your silence that wasn't chosen but expected. Reclaiming your unpredictability is about removing the pressure to be consistent when that consistency only serves others, not your peace. This principle applies everywhere. In leadership, when people expect the same reaction from you and you surprise them with silence or a new direction, you shift the power. In a family, when emotional roles are assigned, he's always the fixer, she always gives in, and you break that cycle without explanation, the system has to realign. Not all will like it, but all will notice it. That's how silent boundaries begin to speak. What makes this so connected to the Stoic mindset is the detachment required. You're not doing this to prove anything. You're doing it because your peace is no longer up for negotiation. You're choosing presence over performance, discipline over emotional reflex. You're not turning cold, you're turning inward. And from that place, you choose your next step not out of habit, but out of clarity. So if people always know what you'll do, it might be time to stop playing along. Withdraw the script they've memorized. Don't announce it. Just act differently, calmly, deliberately, and without explanation. Because when they can't predict you, they can't control you. And when they can't control you, they're forced to meet you where you truly are, not where they assumed you'd always stay. That's not rebellion. That's quite an evolution. And it begins the moment you stop showing up the same way. 6. True power doesn't need to be loud. Real power rarely feels the need to raise its voice. It doesn't demand attention, and it never needs to compete with noise. Instead, it moves with a kind of quiet certainty that's hard to ignore and impossible to fake. In a culture obsessed with visibility, where everyone scrambles to be seen, heard, liked, and shared, the most magnetic presence in the room is often the one that says the least. That's because true power isn't about performance. It's about presence. The kind that doesn't ask for validation because it already owns the room by simply being. What makes this form of power so unshakable is that it comes from within. It's not based on how many people are watching or how loud your opinion is. It comes from self-mastery, from the ability to remain grounded while others chase recognition. And when someone walks into a room with that kind of energy, they don't have to announce anything. You feel it. The air shifts. People pause, not out of fear but out of respect, because deep down, we all recognize what it looks like when someone isn't controlled by the same hunger for attention that drives the world around them. This kind of presence is rare, because it takes discipline to cultivate. It means letting go of the urge to dominate conversations just to feel important. It means becoming comfortable with being underestimated, knowing full well that those who watch long enough will eventually see the truth. And it means building your reputation not through noise, but through consistency in how you think, how you respond, how you carry yourself when no one's clapping. This is where Stoic philosophy becomes more than an idea. It becomes action. It reminds you that you don't control others, only yourself. And that's more than enough when practiced with patience. I once observed a project lead manage a crisis that had most of the team spiraling. People were panicking, emails flying, calls interrupting calls. He didn't say much. He didn't scold or try to rally with dramatic speeches. He walked in, reviewed the situation quietly, asked 2 direct questions, and then calmly laid out a solution. No drama, no panic, just clarity. And the shift was immediate. Everyone slowed down. The tension eased. Not because he barked orders, but because he embodied stability. Later someone said, he didn't need to act powerful, he just was. That distinction stuck with me. Loud power needs an audience. Quiet power creates its own gravity. There's also a deeper psychological effect here. When someone doesn't rush to speak or react, others lean in. They wait, they listen more carefully. And what you say when you finally do lands with more weight. It's not about saying less to be mysterious. It's about only speaking when there's something worth saying. The restraint, the timing, the control, it all signals leadership without shouting it. And over time, people learn to respect not just your voice, but your silence. In the workplace, this often plays out in meetings. The loudest person might dominate airtime, but the one who speaks once and moves the conversation forward becomes the real center of influence. In personal life, it's the friend who listens more than they lecture, but whose words linger long after the conversation ends. The strength lies not in volume, but in precision. In knowing that respect isn't demanded, it's earned, slowly and often silently. So if you've ever felt out of place because you're not the loudest in the room, let this be your reminder. Your silence isn't emptiness. It's depth. Your restraint isn't passivity. It's control. And your calmness doesn't make you invisible. It makes you unforgettable. The world will try to convince you that to matter, you must be louder. But power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it enters quietly, sits still, and watches the rest scramble for what it already holds. Speak when it counts, move when it matters, and trust that the energy you carry speaks long before you ever need to. 7. You don't have to join every game. Not every invitation is worth accepting, especially when it's disguised as conflict. In a world that thrives on reaction, outrage, and constant engagement, choosing not to play is often the strongest move you can make. You're not weak because you walked away. You're not avoiding the truth because you didn't argue. Sometimes the game itself is the trap, and the moment you participate, you've already lost. This isn't about avoiding responsibility. It's about recognizing that not all attention is worth your energy, and not every battle is worthy of your presence. The more reactive the world becomes, the more valuable restraint grows. People bait you with comments, with tone, with silence. They want you to flinch, to defend, to bite back. Why? Because the moment you do, they've pulled you into a game they control. A game that feeds on emotional instability and distraction. But when you remain grounded, when you simply refuse to play, you break that loop. And in that refusal, you reclaim something most people lose too easily: your peace. Some will call it avoidance. Let them. What they often don't understand is the quiet strength it takes to say, "Not this time." Especially when you know you could win the argument, when you know you have the sharper facts, the better story, the cleverer reply. But true power isn't proven in victory. It's preserved in control. The ability to walk away from what does not serve you is not indifference. It's clarity. And clarity isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. I remember a friend who worked in a high-pressure corporate environment. Every week, someone would stir conflict in meetings just to dominate the room. Sarcastic jabs, subtle undermining, attention-grabbing distractions, all calculated to trigger. At first he engaged, thinking silence meant weakness, but it only fed the fire. Then one week he stopped. No rebuttal, no tension, just stillness. The dynamic shifted. The instigator lost steam, others noticed, and more importantly, leadership did too. Not because he shouted his values, but because he chose when not to speak. That silence said more about his discipline than any clever comeback ever could. There's a calm that comes with choosing your battles, especially when those battles are invitations to prove something you no longer feel the need to prove. It's the Stoic understanding that you control your response, not their behavior. That you don't have to dance just because someone's playing music. You decide if the rhythm is worth your movement, and most times it isn't. Because real strength isn't reactive, it's selective. This mindset isn't passive, it's strategic, and it requires practice. Every time someone pushes your button, you have a decision. Do you play the part they expect, or do you hold your position with calm detachment? One reinforces their illusion of control, the other rewrites it. You're not silent because you don't care. You're silent because you see the bigger picture. You're not cold, you're calculating, not in a manipulative way, but in a measured one. You're conserving energy for things that actually move your life forward. When you build this level of restraint, people adjust. They learn that you're not baited easily, not rattled by drama, not eager to prove a point. And slowly, the games stop. Or they move elsewhere, where chaos still works. Either way, your world becomes clearer, quieter, and more yours. Not because you won every battle, but because you stopped fighting ones that never mattered. So the next time someone tries to pull you into something that feels off, stop and ask yourself, what will this cost me? Not just in time, but in peace. And is it worth it? If the answer isn't a strong yes, then let it pass. Let them talk, let them twist, let them wonder. You don't owe them a reaction. You owe yourself the discipline to walk away and the dignity to stay above it. Because sometimes, the smartest move is to leave the board entirely. That's not surrender. That's strategy, and it's how you outlast them all. Power doesn't always come with volume. Sometimes it's built in the quiet, in the pause before you speak, in the moment you choose not to react, in the space where others scramble and you remain still. What you've just walked through isn't a performance, it's a philosophy, a way of moving through life that isn't dictated by pressure, but by principle. To outthink, outlast, and outsmart without shouting, you must first master the silence within you. That's where real control begins, not with others, but with yourself. The more calmly you walk, the clearer you see, and the clearer you see, the fewer games you need to play. This path isn't flashy, but it's effective, and the strength you build here isn't loud, but it's unshakable. Let them underestimate your quiet. Let them misread your stillness. Because in time, they'll come to realize the one who didn't need to speak was the one holding all the power. If this message found you at the right time, take a breath, then share your thoughts below. Your story might be the silence someone else needs to hear. And in that stillness, something stronger begins to rise. Stay sharp, stay quiet, stay steady.